Alicia's finger hovered over the send button. One click would release the evidence that would destroy Christopher Ravencrest forever. Bank records, illegal deals, everything. But her husband's arms were wrapped around her waist as he slept, and she could still taste his desperate whispered confession from hours before. "I'd been trying to fix what my father broke." The man she'd spent 2 years hunting wasn't the monster she'd expected. Now what? Welcome back to Sage King Stories, where love transforms even the deepest wounds into healing. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button right away, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The morning light filtering through Christopher's penthouse windows felt different somehow. Sharper, more unforgiving than the gentle dawn that usually graced the 42nd floor of Manhattan's most exclusive residential tower. Alicia Bowie stared at her phone screen, at the encrypted files that contained enough evidence to bring down the Ravencrest empire, and felt the weight of 2 years of careful planning pressing against her chest like a stone. She'd walked into that marble lobby 6 months ago with perfectly forged credentials and a mission that burned in her chest like swallowed fire. Contract wife to Christopher Ravencrest. 6 months to gather evidence. One goal: destroy the man whose signature had poisoned her world and left her grandmother gasping for breath in a hospital bed that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. The memory of that first meeting still made her pulse quicken in ways she hadn't expected. She'd anticipated a corporate monster, cold, calculating, indifferent to human suffering. Instead, she'd found a man whose eyes held shadows that seemed to mirror her own pain, whose first words had been an apology for keeping her waiting because he'd been reviewing victim compensation files. "Miss Sterling," he'd said, using the false name she'd carefully constructed, "I know this arrangement is unusual, but I need someone who understands environmental law, someone who won't be impressed by corporate authority or intimidated by difficult questions." The contract marriage proposal had been the perfect opportunity for infiltration. What she hadn't expected was the way he'd looked at her when she'd challenged his company's environmental record during that first meeting. Not with the defensive anger she'd anticipated, but with something that looked almost like relief. "You're not going to make this easy for me, are you?" he'd asked. And there had been admiration in his voice rather than irritation. "I don't believe in making environmental destruction easy for anyone," she'd replied, watching his expression carefully for signs of the corporate callousness she'd prepared herself to hate. Instead, his smile had been genuine, transforming his stern features into something unexpectedly warm. "Good. I was hoping you'd say something like that." That first week had been a careful dance of mutual assessment. She'd been gathering intelligence on his daily routines, his business practices, his personal vulnerabilities. He'd been testing her knowledge of environmental law, her commitment to corporate accountability, her willingness to challenge his decisions when she disagreed with them. "The Riverside Cleanup Initiative," she'd said during their 3rd day together, reviewing corporate environmental programs with the critical eye of someone who'd been personally affected by industrial pollution. "The timeline seems deliberately delayed. 3 years to implement water treatment systems that could be installed in 6 months?" Christopher had paused in his review of legal documents, looking at her with the focused attention she was learning to associate with his most serious conversations. "What would you do differently?" "I'd stop treating environmental cleanup like a public relations campaign and start treating it like the medical emergency it actually is." The words had come out sharper than she'd intended, carrying the weight of personal experience she was supposed to be hiding. Children are still using inhalers because of contaminated air. Families are still buying bottled water because their wells are poisoned. Every month of delay means more suffering for people who've already endured too much. "You're absolutely right." His agreement had been immediate and complete, catching her off guard. The legal department recommended the extended timeline to minimize liability exposure. "I've been pushing for faster implementation, but I need someone with environmental expertise to help me override their objections." "Someone like an environmental consultant?" "Someone like you." His eyes had held hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Someone who understands that legal protection means nothing if people continue suffering while we're protecting ourselves. That conversation had been the first crack in the wall of assumptions she'd built around Christopher Ravencrest. Instead of the callous corporate executive she'd expected, she'd found someone genuinely committed to environmental accountability, frustrated by legal obstacles that prevented immediate action. The second crack had come during their first site visit to Riverside District, the community where her grandmother had lived and died. Walking through streets she'd known since childhood, seeing them through Christopher's eyes, she'd watched him interact with families affected by his father's environmental crimes. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he'd said to an elderly woman whose arthritis had been exacerbated by chemical exposure, "I've been reviewing your medical assistance application. The delay is unacceptable. I'm approving immediate funding for your treatment, and I want you to know that our medical advocacy team will ensure you receive the best possible care." The woman had looked at him with suspicion earned through years of corporate promises and legal delays. "You're Harold Ravencrest's son. Why should I trust anything you say?" "Because I've spent the last 3 years trying to fix what my father broke." Christopher's voice had carried quiet conviction and something that sounded like inherited pain. "Because your suffering isn't abstract to me, it's personal responsibility I carry every day." Alicia had watched this exchange with growing confusion. This wasn't the corporate manipulation she'd expected. This was genuine remorse, authentic commitment to making amends for crimes he hadn't committed. The third crack had come during their first heated argument about corporate environmental responsibility. She'd been challenging his company's historical practices, pushing harder than her consultant cover story justified, driven by personal anger she was supposed to be concealing. "Your father's operations poisoned entire communities," she'd said, her voice rising with suppressed fury. "Children developed asthma because of contaminated air. Elderly people died of lung diseases because they couldn't afford to move away from industrial pollution. How do you live with that legacy?" Instead of defensive anger, Christopher had shown her financial records documenting his personal expenditures on victim compensation and medical assistance. Millions of dollars from his own inheritance, not corporate funds, dedicated to helping families his father's company had harmed. "I live with it by spending every day trying to heal the wounds he created," Christopher had replied quietly. "By liquidating personal assets to fund medical treatments for people who should never have needed them. By fighting legal battles to force environmental cleanups that should have happened decades ago. But it's not enough, is it?" The words had escaped before she could stop them, raw with the grief she'd been carrying since her grandmother's death. "All the money in the world can't bring back the people who died while your company poisoned the air they needed to survive. No, it's not enough." His admission had been stark, undefended. "Nothing I do will ever be enough to balance the harm my father caused. But doing something is better than doing nothing. Fighting for environmental accountability is better than accepting inherited guilt and doing nothing constructive with it." That night, she'd found herself reviewing the evidence she'd gathered with growing uncertainty. Every document she'd photographed, every conversation she'd recorded, every financial transaction she'd documented, all of it painted a picture of someone desperately trying to atone for crimes he hadn't committed, not someone continuing criminal operations for personal profit. The fourth crack had come when she discovered Christopher's private study, filled with evidence she'd never expected to find. Not documents proving ongoing environmental crimes, but records of his attempts to identify and stop criminal activities being conducted without his knowledge or consent. Private investigator reports documenting suspicious corporate activities. Audio recordings of conversations with his father's former business associates. Financial records showing unauthorized transactions occurring while he was testifying in environmental lawsuits in other cities. A comprehensive picture of someone being systematically deceived and manipulated by people using his corporate authority for their own criminal purposes. "You've been investigating your own company," she'd said, finding him in the study late one evening, surrounded by the evidence of his private war against corruption he couldn't prove publicly. "For 2 years," he'd confirmed, looking up from legal documents with exhaustion that spoke to sleepless nights and endless frustration. "I knew someone was using my corporate authority to continue environmental crimes, but I couldn't prove it without evidence that would hold up in federal court. That's why you needed the contract marriage. You needed someone inside your organization who could witness ongoing crimes and document your opposition to them. I needed someone with environmental expertise who would care enough about justice to look closely at company operations. His eyes had held hers with intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through all her careful deceptions. Someone who wouldn't be impressed by wealth or intimidated by corporate authority. Someone who would notice if criminal activities were continuing and help me prove I wasn't responsible for them. You wanted me to find evidence of ongoing conspiracy. I wanted someone to help me prove I was fighting it, not leading it. He pulled out the thick marriage contract, the legal document she'd only skimmed when focused on gaining access to his operations. Read this again. Really read it this time. She'd taken the document, scanning legal language she dismissed as standard boilerplate, but reading carefully, she'd seen clauses that changed everything about their arrangement. The contracted spouse shall have unlimited access to all corporate records for the purpose of environmental oversight and compliance verification. She'd read aloud. Keep reading. The contracted spouse is specifically authorized to conduct independent investigations into all company operations, past and present, and to report any findings of criminal activity to appropriate legal authorities without restriction or corporate interference. She'd looked up at him with growing amazement. This contract gave me legal authority to investigate you. It gave you legal protection to investigate criminal activities within my company, even if those activities were being conducted without my knowledge or consent. His voice had been gentle but serious. I was trying to create a legitimate whistleblower position. You were trying to create a partner with the legal expertise and moral conviction necessary to help you expose the truth. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by wealth or impressed by corporate authority. Someone who would fight for real solutions regardless of personal cost or political pressure. Christopher's eyes had searched hers. Someone exactly like you. That conversation had shattered every assumption she built her mission on. Christopher Ravencrest wasn't a cold corporate monster continuing his father's crimes. He was another victim of them, fighting the same battles she was, just fighting them from inside a system designed to protect the actual criminals. Now, 6 months later, she understood why he'd looked relieved when she challenged him during their first meeting. He hadn't been seeking a compliant wife who would ignore ongoing crimes. He'd been desperately searching for someone with the expertise and moral conviction to help him uncover criminal activities he suspected but couldn't prove alone. Her phone buzzed again, more insistently. Inspector Thaddeus Kane's name appeared on the screen, and she knew what he wanted. Progress. Evidence. The final pieces needed to bring down the Ravencrest empire and satisfy the families who had been demanding accountability for over a decade. She had those pieces. Everything the FBI needed was saved in encrypted files on this very phone, but using them would destroy an innocent man who had been trying to solve the same problems she'd come here to address. Christopher stirred beside her, his arm tightening unconsciously around her waist, and she remembered last night, the conversation that had changed everything between them. It had started when he'd found her crying over a photograph of her grandmother, the one she'd hidden in her jewelry box. Dolores Bowie's bright smile, captured before the lung cancer had stolen her laughter and left only pain. She was beautiful, he'd said quietly, sitting beside her with the careful distance he always maintained, respecting the boundaries of their contract, even as something deeper had been growing between them for months. She was everything to me. The words had slipped out before she could stop them. Raw with grief, she usually kept carefully controlled. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, never complained about the air that burned her lungs, never blamed anyone for the pollution that was killing her slowly. What was her name? Dolores. Dolores Bowie. The truth had escaped before she could catch it, and she'd held her breath, waiting for him to make the connection, to realize that his contract wife was related to one of the victim compensation cases he'd been reviewing. Instead, his face had gone very still, and when he spoke, his voice had been thick with emotion she now understood. I've been looking for Dolores Bowie's family for 3 years. What? There's a compensation fund, $500,000 approved and waiting for disbursement to her relatives. I've had private investigators searching for any surviving family members who might be willing to accept assistance. His voice had grown rougher, weighted with guilt that she now knew was undeserved. Your grandmother's case broke my heart. A woman who worked so hard, who never had a chance to escape the pollution that killed her. You've been trying to help her? I've been trying to honor her memory, to make sure her death meant something, led to changes that would prevent other families from suffering the same loss. Christopher's voice had carried deep pain and determined purpose. She deserved so much better than what my father's company did to her community. That revelation had shattered every assumption she'd built her mission on. Christopher Ravencrest wasn't continuing his father's crimes. He was another victim of them, drowning in inherited guilt, trying to atone for sins he hadn't committed, while the real criminals stayed hidden in the shadows. I've been trying to fix what my father broke, he'd whispered against her hair, his arms tightening around her as if she were something precious rather than dangerous. Every day for 3 years, I've been trying to find a way to heal the wounds he created. You've been fighting the same fight I am. She'd realized with dawning amazement, just fighting it differently. I've been hoping someone with your expertise and moral conviction would help me find real solutions instead of legal compromises. His eyes had searched hers. Someone who would care enough about environmental accountability to help me expose the truth, whatever that truth turned out to be. The conversation had continued deep into the night, both of them finally honest about their motivations. Their fears, their growing feelings for each other despite the impossible circumstances that had brought them together. By dawn, she'd understood that Christopher had been investigating the same corruption network she'd been targeting, but from the inside, without the resources or authority of a federal investigation. He'd been fighting the same fight she was, just fighting it through civil lawsuits instead of criminal charges, through victim compensation instead of asset seizure, through gradual reform instead of dramatic prosecution. And he'd been doing it alone, isolated by inherited guilt and corporate responsibility, hoping desperately that someone would help him find the truth. Christopher's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face with the gentle concern she'd learned to associate with their early morning conversations. These quiet moments had become precious to her, despite her original intentions. In the soft light before the world demanded their public personas, they could simply be themselves. Can't sleep again? His voice was rough with exhaustion, and she noticed the dark circles that had become permanent fixtures under his eyes. He'd been working 18-hour days for months, liquidating personal assets to fund environmental programs, fighting legal battles to force cleanups his company hadn't even caused. Just thinking, her thumb still hovered over the phone screen that would end everything between them. About yesterday's meeting with the EPA delegation? He shifted carefully, propping himself up to study her expression without making her feel crowded or pressured. I noticed Victor Crane made you uncomfortable. He makes me uncomfortable too, though I can't quite put my finger on why. If only he knew. Victor Crane, EPA Regional Director and one of her primary targets, the man who'd been taking bribes for 20 years, who'd approved every illegal permit, who'd covered up every violation that had turned neighborhoods like hers into environmental disaster zones. The man who'd been forging Christopher's signature since his father's death 3 years ago, keeping the corruption flowing, while an innocent son took the blame for crimes that continued to destroy lives. There's something about him that doesn't feel quite right, she said carefully, testing how much she could reveal without compromising her cover. Christopher's expression grew thoughtful. I've been having the same feeling. He's always pushing for faster permit approvals, fewer environmental impact studies, reduced oversight on disposal contracts. Everything my father would have wanted, everything I've been trying to change. Have you considered that he might be working against your environmental initiatives? I've considered it, but proving corruption in federal agencies requires evidence I don't have. His voice carried frustration that she now understood was entirely justified. I've had private investigators looking into several of my father's former associates, but they're careful. Too careful. Alicia felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with painful clarity. Christopher had been investigating the same corruption network she'd been targeting, but from the inside, without the resources or authority of a federal investigation. He'd been fighting the same fight she was, just fighting it differently. "Chris," she started, then stopped. What could she say? "I've been lying to you for 6 months. I'm not who you think I am. I came here to destroy you, and now I'm falling apart because you're not the monster I needed you to be." He reached up, tucking a strand of her natural hair behind her ear with the gentle reverence that always made her pulse skip. She'd stopped straightening her hair weeks ago, stopped hiding behind the perfect corporate mask she'd worn when she first arrived. Somewhere in the past month, she'd started letting him see glimpses of her real self. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" His brown eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her want to confess everything. "Whatever it is you're afraid of, whatever secrets you're carrying, we'll figure it out together." Together. The word hit her like a physical blow, because there was no together in her original plan. There was only accountability, consequences, and the systematic dismantling of everything he built his life around. But now, looking at his concerned expression, feeling the warmth of his touch, tasting the memory of their conversations about environmental law and corporate responsibility, she couldn't remember why destroying him had ever seemed like the right path forward. Her phone buzzed a third time, and Christopher glanced at the screen with mild curiosity rather than suspicion. "Someone's been calling you a lot lately," he observed. "Important environmental consulting case?" She was supposed to be an environmental consultant specializing in corporate compliance, a cover story that explained her knowledge of environmental law while justifying her questions about company operations. It was believable that she'd have urgent client calls requiring early morning responses. But the lie stuck in her throat as she looked at his trusting expression. "It's complicated," she said finally, the closest thing to truth she could manage. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her shoulder through the silk of her nightgown. The gesture was familiar now, something he did when he was thinking, processing information or emotions he wasn't quite ready to verbalize. "Everything about us is complicated," he said eventually. "Arranged marriages usually are, especially when both parties are hiding things they're not ready to share." Alicia felt her chest tighten. "Hiding things? Alicia, I'm not an idiot." His voice carried gentle amusement rather than accusation. "You think I haven't noticed how you tense up whenever people ask about your past? How you change the subject when I try to learn about your family? How you're clearly the most brilliant environmental lawyer I've ever met, despite claiming you're just a consultant?" Her world stopped completely. "You know? I know you're not who you claim to be. I've known since the day you walked into my office and challenged everything I said about corporate environmental responsibility." His hand moved to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "No consultant talks like that. No one fights that hard for environmental accountability unless it's deeply personal. And you married me anyway? I married you because of it." His eyes held steady on hers, and she saw something that looked like hope mixed with determination. "Whatever you're running from, whatever accountability you're seeking, whatever truth you're afraid to tell me, I want to help. I want to be worthy of the fire I see in your eyes when you think no one's watching." Alicia felt tears threaten for the first time in months. 6 months of lies, 6 months of careful deception, 6 months of gathering evidence to destroy him, and he'd seen through all of it. More than that, he'd married a woman he knew was lying to him because he believed in the cause that drove her. Her phone buzzed a fourth time, more insistently. "Answer it," Christopher said quietly. "Whatever this is about, whatever you're afraid to tell me, we'll handle it together." "We." The word carried implications that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. There was no "we" in her mission brief. There was only target acquisition and evidence gathering and asset seizure. But somewhere in the past 6 months, "we" had become the most natural word in her vocabulary. She looked down at the phone screen, at Inspector Kane's name, at the send button that would trigger everything. One touch would release 6 months of evidence. One moment of courage would initiate the federal investigation that would tear apart Christopher's life, freeze his assets, and destroy any chance he had of helping the communities his father had poisoned. Or she could delete everything and choose him, choose the man who'd never committed the crimes she'd blamed him for. Choose the husband who'd married a woman he knew was lying to him because he believed in her cause. Choose love over the revenge that had consumed her for 2 years. Healing over the hatred that had driven her since her grandmother's death. But could she live with herself if she chose personal happiness over accountability for her community? Could she forgive herself for protecting the man she loved while families continued suffering from environmental crimes? Could she betray the memory of her grandmother, the trust of Inspector Kane, the expectations of every person who was counting on her to bring down the Ravencrest empire? What happens when the person you spent months planning to destroy turns out to be fighting the same battle you are? When the evidence in your hands could eliminate both your greatest enemy and your truest ally? The phone continued buzzing in her hand, demanding an answer she wasn't prepared to give. Christopher's arms continued holding her as if she were something worth protecting, something precious rather than dangerous. Somewhere in the distance, a corruption network that had been operating in his name for 3 years continued poisoning communities while hiding behind forged documents and falsified permits. And Alicia Bowie, whose real name was Alicia Sterling, whose grandmother had died gasping for clean hair, whose entire adult life had been devoted to bringing down the Ravencrest empire, had to choose between the man she'd come to love and the mission that had given her purpose. The evidence was right there in her hand. Bank records showing millions in bribes, environmental permits approving illegal dumping, disposal contracts that had turned her childhood neighborhood into a wasteland of cancer and birth defects and shortened lives. All signed with Christopher Ravencrest's name. All forgeries committed by the real criminals. All lies that would destroy an innocent man while letting the guilty escape accountability. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the penthouse in shades of gold and possibility, and Alicia made her choice. She deleted everything. 6 months of evidence, hundreds of photographs documenting financial records, audio recordings of suspicious conversations, bank statements showing questionable transfers. Everything the FBI needed to build their RICO case against Christopher Ravencrest. Gone with deliberate swipes of her finger. Christopher's eyes widened as he watched her delete file after file. "Alicia, what are you doing?" "Choosing you," she whispered, then stronger, with the conviction of someone who'd finally found solid ground. "Choosing us." His phone immediately started ringing. She looked at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. Inspector Thaddeus Kane. "Don't answer that," she said quickly, her hand covering his before he could reach for the device. "Why not? Alicia, what's going on?" She took a deep breath, feeling simultaneously lighter and more terrified than she'd felt in years. The weight of deception was lifting from her shoulders, but the weight of truth was settling in its place, heavier, more complex, infinitely more dangerous. "Because I have something to tell you first, something that changes everything about who I am, why I'm here, and what I've been doing for the past 6 months. Her voice gained strength as she spoke, the relief of honesty overwhelming her fear of consequences. "My name isn't Alicia Sterling. It's Alicia Bowie." Christopher went very still, processing the significance of the name. "Bowie, like Dolores Bowie, my grandmother, and I'm not an environmental consultant, Chris. I'm an environmental lawyer, and I've been working with the FBI for 6 months to build a federal RICO case against you." The silence that followed was deafening. She watched his face carefully, expecting anger, betrayal, the kind of rage that would justify every suspicion she'd harbored about wealthy corporate executives and their capacity for manipulation. Instead, she saw something like relief wash over his features. "So you know," he said quietly, his voice carrying an odd note of satisfaction. "You know about the forged signatures, about the ongoing criminal operations being conducted without my knowledge or consent." "Chris." "No, this is good. This is perfect." He ran his hands through his hair, suddenly looking more awake and energized than he had in months. You have federal investigative training. You have evidence-gathering experience I don't have. You've been documenting criminal activities from the inside, while I've been trying to prove they exist from the outside." Alicia stared at him, completely unprepared for this reaction. "I came here to destroy you. You came here to gather evidence of criminal activities. I've been hoping someone with your expertise would find a way to expose the ongoing crimes I couldn't prove myself." His eyes were bright with possibility rather than dark with betrayal. "Alicia, don't you see? You've been gathering evidence of the exact conspiracy I've been trying to expose for 3 years. I deleted it all." He stopped, the excitement fading from his expression. "What?" "I deleted everything. 6 months of evidence, hundreds of documents, financial records that proved." She struggled to find words that would make him understand. "Financial records that proved someone has been systematically using your identity to continue criminal operations while you've been trying to stop them." Christopher was quiet for a very long moment, studying her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time since they'd met. "Alicia Bowie," he said finally, testing her real name on his tongue. "The environmental lawyer from the Riverside district. Where your father's company dumped chemicals for 15 years. Where my grandmother died of lung cancer at 58 because she couldn't afford to move away from the contaminated air." Her voice caught on the familiar pain, but she forced herself to continue. "Where children still carry inhalers to school because their developing lungs can't handle the pollution levels that remain in the groundwater and soil." Understanding flooded his expression, and she saw the exact moment when all the pieces clicked into place for him. "Your grandmother. The victim compensation application that was rejected 3 times due to insufficient evidence linking her illness to company operations. Dolores Bowie, who worked 3 jobs and never complained about the air that was killing her. You know about her case specifically?" "I know about all of them. Every rejected application, every family that got denied help because of legal technicalities and bureaucratic obstacles." His voice grew rougher, weighted with guilt that she now understood was entirely undeserved. "I've been working with lawyers for 2 years to overturn those rejections, to fund medical treatments and compensation programs, to find ways around the legal barriers my father's associates built to avoid responsibility." "You've been trying to help Riverside?" "Every day since I found the records showing what my father's operations had done to your community." He reached for her hands, his touch gentle but urgent. "The compensation fund, the cleanup programs, the medical assistance initiatives. I've liquidated half my personal assets to fund treatments for families like yours." Alicia felt something crack open in her chest. A fissure in the wall of anger and suspicion she'd built around her heart. "What do you mean, families like mine?" "Families who were poisoned by Ravencrest Industries' criminal operations and then denied help by the legal system my father corrupted." Christopher's voice grew infinitely gentle. "Including a fund specifically established for Dolores Bowie's medical bills, funeral expenses, and ongoing family support. Your grandmother, Alicia, I've been trying to honor her memory for 3 years." The room spun around her. "What? Check your phone. Access the Ravencrest Foundation Victim Compensation Database. Look up your grandmother's name." With trembling fingers, Alicia opened the foundation website and searched the compensation records. There it was, in black and white digital text that made her vision blur. Dolores Bowie, approved for full medical reimbursement, funeral expenses, and ongoing family support totaling $500,000. "When was this approved?" she whispered. 3 years ago. The day after I found the records showing what my father's operations had done to Riverside and dozens of other communities." He touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away tears she didn't realize had started falling. "I've been looking for Dolores Bowie's family ever since. Trying to find a way to deliver the compensation without it seeming like corporate guilt money. I wanted to find an approach that honored her memory properly, that felt like genuine healing rather than legal obligation." Alicia stared at the screen, at the amount approved for her family's suffering, $500,000 in medical reimbursements, funeral costs, and family support. Money that had been sitting in an account for 3 years, waiting for relatives who'd been too angry and suspicious to trust anything connected to the Ravencrest name. I never applied for this. My family never applied for this. Your brother did. Isaiah Bowie, community organizer and environmental activist. He submitted an application on behalf of the family estate 18 months ago, but never followed up to claim the approved funds. Christopher's voice was infinitely patient, as if he understood the overwhelming nature of what he was telling her. I've been hoping someone from your family would eventually come forward so I could finally make things right. You've known I was related to her? I suspected. When you told me your grandmother died of lung cancer, when you showed such passionate commitment to environmental accountability, when you argued so eloquently about corporate responsibility, I wondered if he might be connected to one of the victim families. His eyes searched hers. I hoped you were Dolores Bowie's granddaughter, because then maybe I could finally do something meaningful to honor her memory. You suspected I was lying about my identity? I hoped you were exactly who I thought you might be underneath the cover story. He touched her hand, where it still held the phone displaying her grandmother's compensation record. Alicia, I've been falling in love with you for 6 months, but I've been loving your grandmother's memory for 3 years. The phone began ringing again, Inspector Kane's name flashing insistently on the screen. The sound cut through the emotional intensity of the moment, like a blade, reminding them both of the larger crisis they were facing. Answer it, Christopher said quietly. Tell him the truth. Tell him you've been gathering evidence of ongoing criminal operations, and now you know who the real perpetrators are. Chris, they'll arrest you anyway. The evidence I gathered shows your signature on recent documents authorizing environmental crimes. No federal prosecutor is going to believe claims about forged signatures when the financial records look so convincing. Then we'll prove it together. He took her hands in his, and she felt the same steadiness that had first drawn her to him 6 months ago. You have investigative skills and federal connections I don't have. I have legal resources and inside access you don't have. Your community needs real accountability, not just the prosecution of a convenient scapegoat. The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility and desire. She could feel his pulse racing beneath her palms, could see the way he was looking at her, not with the careful respect of their business arrangement, but with the raw hunger of someone who'd been denying his deepest wants for far too long. If we do this, if we work together to expose the real corruption network, we could both end up in federal prison, better than living the rest of our lives knowing we let the actual criminals escape accountability while innocent people continued suffering. Christopher's eyes were steady on hers, filled with the same moral conviction that had driven her to law school, to environmental advocacy, to this moment of impossible choice. Better than letting them keep poisoning communities while hiding behind my family's name and my forged signature. She felt heat building between them, the same electricity that had sparked during their first argument about corporate responsibility, but deeper now, layered with trust and shared purpose. When he moved closer, she didn't pull away. Together? She asked, hearing her grandmother's voice in her memory, telling her that the most important battles were the ones fought alongside people who shared your values. Together, Christopher confirmed, and when he leaned down to kiss her, she met him halfway. The kiss was everything she'd been denying herself for months. Gentle, but urgent, conveying months of suppressed longing and the desperate relief of finally sharing the truth. She tasted the fear he'd been hiding, the hope that they might survive this crisis, the love that had been growing despite every reason it shouldn't exist. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, she felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. Not just because of the physical connection, though that was undeniable, but because of what the kiss represented, choosing each other despite impossible odds, committing to a partnership that could cost them everything. We should answer that phone call, she said softly, though she made no move to step away from his embrace. In a minute. His forehead rested against hers, and she could feel his breath warm against her lips. I need to know something first. What? When you decided to delete that evidence, when you chose me over your mission, was it just because you discovered I was innocent? The question hung between them, weighted with implications that went far beyond federal investigations and environmental crimes. She thought about the past month, about quiet conversations over morning coffee and heated debates about corporate responsibility, about the way he'd shown her victim compensation files with the same passionate commitment she'd carried since her grandmother's death. "I chose you because I realized we want the same thing," she said finally. "Accountability for people who've been poisoned by corporate crimes. Healing for communities that have been ignored by the legal system. Change that actually prevents future harm rather than just punishing past mistakes. And because somewhere in the past 6 months, fighting with you and working beside you and watching you try to fix problems you didn't create, I fell in love with the man you actually are instead of the monster I expected you to be." This time when he kissed her, it was different. Deeper, more desperate, conveying not just attraction, but the recognition of partnership that went beyond physical desire. She felt herself melting into him, all the walls she'd built around her heart crumbling, as she finally admitted what she'd been fighting for weeks. "Have you ever discovered that the person you thought was your enemy was actually fighting the same battle you were, just from a different side? Have you ever had to choose between the safety of revenge and the risk of love?" When the kiss ended, they were both breathing hard, standing closer than the boundaries of their contract marriage had ever allowed. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see desire and determination warring in his expression. "Alicia," he said, his voice rough with emotion and physical awareness, "I know this started as a business arrangement. I know the circumstances have been complicated and the timing is terrible. But I need you to know, whatever happens with federal investigations and criminal conspiracies, whatever danger we're facing together, I love you. Not the cover identity you created, not the environmental consultant persona, but you, the woman who transforms grief into purpose and fights for people who can't fight for themselves. I love you too," she whispered, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones, like coming home. The real you. A man who inherited poison and chose to transform it into healing, who married a woman he knew was lying to him because he believed in her cause. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. The sound cut through their moment like a blade, reminding them of the larger crisis they were facing. "Together?" Christopher asked one more time, his thumb tracing along her jawline with reverent gentleness. "Together," she confirmed, and answered the call. "Agent Bowie, where the hell have you been?" Inspector Kane's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp with impatience and barely controlled frustration. "I've been calling for over an hour. Please tell me you have the final evidence packages we need to move forward with federal charges." She felt Christopher's hand squeeze hers, offering support and solidarity. "I have new information about the case, Inspector. Information that significantly changes our understanding of the criminal conspiracy." "New information? Agent Bowie, we've been building this investigation for 6 months. We have a federal prosecutor standing by, grand jury proceedings scheduled, asset seizure warrants prepared." His voice carried the tone of a man who'd invested significant political capital in a case and wasn't interested in complications. "I need confirmation that you've gathered sufficient evidence for the RICO charges against Christopher Ravencrest." Christopher gestured for the phone, and after a moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. He looked at her once more, a silent question in his eyes, and she nodded. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "Inspector Kane, this is Christopher Ravencrest." The silence on the other end was profound, stretching long enough that Alicia wondered if the call had disconnected. Finally, "Mr. Ravencrest, I wasn't aware you were present for this conversation. This is highly irregular. Agent Bowie has informed me about the federal investigation into my company's operations." Christopher's voice carried the same authority she'd heard him use in board meetings, but with an underlying gentleness that spoke to his fundamental decency. "I'd like to cooperate fully with your investigation. However, I believe there may be significant inaccuracies in the evidence you've been gathering. Sir, I'm going to have to ask Agent Bowie to call me back on a secured line. This conversation is entirely inappropriate for someone under federal investigation." "Inspector," Alicia interrupted, taking the phone back. "Everything we discussed about forged signatures and ongoing criminal operations, it's all true. Someone has been systematically using Christopher's identity to continue environmental crimes while he's been trying to stop them. Agent Bowie, you're supposed to be gathering evidence to build our case, not developing alternate theories about your target's innocence. Kane's voice turned sharp, with suspicion and growing alarm. The financial records are unambiguous. The signature analysis is conclusive. The timeline shows continuous criminal operations spanning 3 years. Christopher was already moving toward his study, gesturing for her to follow. Kane, she said, walking quickly down the marble hallway lined with family portraits that seemed to watch her with aristocratic disapproval. What if I told you the real perpetrators are still actively committing environmental crimes? What if the person you're targeting has been trying to stop the activities you're investigating? I'd say you've been compromised, Agent Bowie. Your objectivity regarding the target was already questionable given your personal connection to the affected community. In the study, Christopher was pulling files from a locked cabinet she'd never seen him access before, spreading documents across his massive mahogany desk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been building his own case for years. Financial records, legal correspondence, private investigator reports, evidence of his attempts to identify and stop the criminal operations being conducted in his name. Look at this, he whispered, pointing to a bank transfer dated 6 weeks ago. Bribery payment to Victor Crane, EPA Regional Director. $500,000, authorized with my signature. Alicia looked at the document, then at Christopher's expression of grim determination. You didn't authorize this payment? I was in London 6 weeks ago. Hospital board meeting at St. Bartholomew's Medical Center, presenting new research on environmental illness treatment protocols. He pulled out another file, this one thick with official documentation. Here's my passport with entry and exit stamps, hotel receipts showing my location, meeting minutes with my signature, security footage from the hospital conference. I wasn't even in the country when this bribery payment was allegedly made. Agent Bowie. Kane's voice cut through her concentration. Are you still there? I need you to report to headquarters immediately for debriefing and case closure preparation. I'm here, Inspector. Listen to me carefully. We need to expand this investigation beyond Christopher Ravencrest. The corruption network is larger and more sophisticated than we initially understood. The corruption network is exactly what we thought it was. Christopher Ravencrest continuing his father's criminal operations using inherited corporate authority. Kane's voice carried the finality of someone who'd already made up his mind. We have documented evidence spanning 3 years of continuous environmental crimes. Evidence of forged signatures and systematic identity theft. Alicia corrected, picking up another document from Christopher's desk. Inspector, I need you to cross-reference the federal database with Christopher Ravencrest's travel records. Check his location on March 15th, when this disposal contract was supposedly signed. Agent Bowie, I'm ordering you to report to headquarters immediately. Your cover has clearly been blown, and your judgment has been compromised by personal involvement with the target. Christopher touched her arm, pointing to a photograph on his desk that made her chest tighten with recognition. It showed him sitting on a small hospital bed, reading to a bald little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The child's face was thin with illness, but her eyes were bright with attention, and Christopher's expression showed the same gentle concern she'd seen him direct toward environmental cleanup workers and victim family advocates. This is from the Children's Cancer Ward at Riverside General Hospital, he said quietly. I was there the day this bribery payment was allegedly authorized, reading to kids whose illnesses were caused by environmental crimes committed in my father's name. The photograph was dated 6 weeks ago, time-stamped during the exact hours when the bank transfer had been processed. Christopher had been 3,000 miles away, volunteering at a hospital for children whose cancers were directly linked to Ravencrest Industries' historical operations. Kane, she said firmly, I'm not coming in, not yet. There are innocent people who will be harmed if we move forward with incomplete information about the real scope of this conspiracy. Agent Bowie, you are directly ordered to report immediately or face charges of obstruction and conspiracy. And then charge me. The words came out stronger than she'd expected, carrying a conviction that surprised her. But I won't be responsible for destroying an innocent man while the actual criminals escape accountability and continue poisoning communities. She hung up. Christopher stared at her with an expression of amazement and something that might have been awe. You just ended your FBI career. I just chose the right side. She touched the photograph of him with the sick child, feeling pieces of a larger picture clicking into place. How long have you been visiting that hospital? Every month since I found out what my father's operations had done to communities like Riverside. Dr. Elena Martinez, the chief of oncology, has been helping me understand the long-term medical impacts of chemical exposure. His voice grew quiet with remembered pain. She lost her own daughter to leukemia caused by environmental factors. Alicia felt her throat tighten with recognition and approaching tears. What was her daughter's name? Sophia Martinez. She was 7 years old when she died. The name hit her like a physical blow, bringing back memories she'd buried for years. Chris, Sophia Martinez was in my 5th grade reading class. He went completely still. What? I taught at Riverside Elementary before I went to law school. Sophia was in my after-school tutoring program for struggling readers. The memory of Sophia's bright smile, her enthusiasm for chapter books, her questions about becoming a lawyer like Miss Alicia, it all came flooding back with devastating clarity. She wanted to be a civil rights attorney. She said she was going to help people who couldn't help themselves. Christopher's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide. Dr. Martinez told me about a young teacher who'd inspired Sophia to love learning, someone who'd made her believe she could be anything she wanted to be, despite her illness. That was me. You inspired the little girl whose death made me understand the true scope of what my family's legacy had done to innocent people. He reached for her hands, his voice breaking slightly with the weight of connection and shared grief. Alicia, you've been connected to this fight much longer than either of us realized. The revelation hung between them, like a bridge spanning years of pain and misunderstanding. Sophia Martinez, the bright, curious child who'd loved reading mysteries and asking endless questions about fairness, had been the catalyst for both their journeys towards this moment. Her death had driven Alicia to law school and environmental advocacy. Her memory had motivated Christopher's desperate attempts at corporate redemption. She used to ask me why some people got sick more than others, Alicia whispered, remembering small hands holding picture books, dark eyes bright with intelligence, despite the growing shadows of illness. Why kids in some neighborhoods needed inhalers and kids in other neighborhoods didn't. I told her that someday, lawyers like her would help fix those unfair differences. And she told Dr. Martinez that her teacher, Miss Alicia, had promised her that smart people who cared about fairness could change the world. Christopher's voice was thick with emotion. She made me promise to keep trying to fix what my father broke, even when it seemed impossible. Her phone buzzed with a text message, breaking through the emotional intensity of their shared memory. Not from Cain this time, from her brother Isaiah, whose name on the screen made her stomach drop with dread. FBI agents just left my apartment. They're looking for you with arrest warrants. Said you've gone rogue and are considered a flight risk. What's happening, Alicia? They're moving fast, she said, showing Christopher the message. Federal arrest warrants mean they'll freeze my assets within hours, Christopher said grimly. Once they file charges, everything gets locked down by court order, including the victim compensation funds, the medical assistance programs, the environmental cleanup projects. Thousands of families will lose their support while the case works through the courts. Then we have to stop them. Alicia, they have federal authority and unlimited resources. I'm one man with some lawyers and private investigators against the entire FBI and Department of Justice. You're one man with inside knowledge and legal resources. I'm one woman with investigative training and personal motivation. She pulled out her laptop, opening encrypted files she'd kept separate from the FBI evidence, backups she'd maintained for her own analysis. And together, we're two people who know exactly where to look for proof of the real conspiracy. Christopher watched her work, and she felt his presence like a steady anchor in the storm of federal investigation and personal revelation. 6 months ago, she'd walked into his life planning to destroy everything he'd built. Now, sitting in his private study, surrounded by evidence of his innocence and his commitment to environmental healing, she understood that her grandmother's spirit had guided her here not for revenge, but for redemption. "Where do we start?" he asked, his voice carrying the same quiet determination that had first attracted her attention during their heated arguments about corporate responsibility. "With the network that's been operating in your name, while staying carefully hidden from your knowledge." She pulled up financial records she'd photographed during months of surveillance, documents that painted a clear picture of ongoing criminal conspiracy. Victor Crane, EPA Regional Director; Helena Voss, CEO of Voss Chemical Disposal; Senator Marcus Webb, Chairman of the Environmental Protection Subcommittee; your father's golf partners, his business associates, his political protection network. They didn't stop when he died 3 years ago, Christopher realized, studying the organized evidence. They just found a new signature to forge and continued the operations without missing a step. Exactly. They've been using your inherited corporate authority to approve environmental crimes you don't even know about. Subsidiaries you're not aware you own. Permits you never applied for. Disposal contracts you never signed. Alicia's fingers flew over the keyboard, connecting patterns she'd been trained to recognize during her FBI preparation. But here's what they didn't count on. You fighting back. You creating paper trails they couldn't control. Christopher pulled out another file, this one marked with the logo of a private investigation firm. My investigators have been tracking unusual corporate activities for 2 years. Payments I didn't authorize, properties I didn't know I owned, legal filings made without my knowledge or consent. And I have 6 months of surveillance evidence showing exactly how they've been coordinating their operations. She looked up at him, feeling the familiar surge of purpose that had driven her through law school and environmental advocacy. "Chris, we can prove they've been committing systematic identity theft and criminal conspiracy on a massive scale. But will anyone listen before the federal charges destroy my ability to fund victim assistance programs?" Alicia's phone rang again, and this time the caller ID showed a name that made her chest race with hope. Celeste Hartwell, the civil rights attorney who'd trained her, who'd recommended her for the FBI assignment, who'd built her career on fighting corporate corruption and environmental crimes. "I have to answer this," she said. "Celeste? Alicia, what in the world is going on? I just received a call from the FBI saying you've gone rogue and are suspected of being compromised by your investigation target." "Celeste, I need you to listen very carefully and trust me the way you did when I was your student. The federal investigation is based on forged evidence. Christopher Ravencrest is innocent of the crimes he's being charged with." "Innocent?" "Alicia, you spent 6 months gathering evidence against him. Evidence of crimes committed by other people using his identity and corporate authority." She looked at Christopher, who was organizing documents with the focused precision of someone who'd been fighting this battle for years. "Celeste, what if I told you he's been funding victim compensation programs out of his personal assets? What if I told you he's been working to expose the same corruption network we've been targeting?" "I'd say you've lost your professional objectivity." "No, I've found the truth." Alicia took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would determine whether they had any chance of stopping the federal case before it destroyed an innocent man. "Celeste, I need you to represent Christopher Ravencrest." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that Alicia wondered if the call had been disconnected. "Alicia, you cannot be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. This man has been fighting for environmental accountability longer than I have. He's been trying to heal wounds his father created, and now he's about to be destroyed for crimes he didn't commit. The evidence you gathered is falsified, forged signatures, manufactured financial records, fabricated permits. The real criminals have been hiding behind his name while he's been trying to expose them." Christopher touched her shoulder, gesturing to a legal document he'd found in his files. A federal court filing dated 6 months ago, requesting investigation into ongoing criminal activities being conducted without the knowledge or consent of current Ravencrest Industries leadership. He'd been asking for the same federal investigation she'd been assigned to conduct. Celeste, Alicia said, reading the legal brief on her laptop screen. He filed for federal investigation into his own company 6 months ago. The same day I was assigned to infiltrate his organization. He's been trying to trigger the same investigation I was sent to build. That's highly unusual. It's proof, Celeste. Proof that an innocent man is about to be destroyed by a federal case built on evidence falsified by the actual criminals. Her voice strengthened with conviction as the pieces continued falling into place. And if that happens, the real corruption network escapes while communities continue being poisoned. Christopher was writing quickly on a legal pad, then handed her a note. Tell her about the medical research grants, the children's hospital funding, the water purification projects in affected communities. He's been funding medical treatment for environmental illness victims, Alicia continued. Children's cancer research at the hospital where Sofia Martinez was treated. Water purification projects in communities affected by his father's operations. She felt her voice catch slightly. Celeste, this isn't a corrupt corporate executive. This is someone who's been trying to atone for crimes he didn't commit, while fighting the people who actually committed them. Alicia, if what you're saying is true, then we're about to witness the perfect crime. The real criminals eliminate their only threat by framing him for their own operations, while the federal government does their dirty work for them. Christopher had pulled out his phone and was scrolling through contacts, then handed the device to her. On the screen was Dr. Elena Martinez's contact information. Celeste, can you call Dr. Elena Martinez at Riverside General Hospital? Ask her about Christopher Ravencrest's involvement with environmental illness treatment programs. Why? Because she can confirm that he's been fighting for the same communities we've been trying to help. Because she can prove his commitment to environmental accountability isn't some recent conversion. It's been his mission for 3 years. Alicia heard typing on the other end of the line. Celeste, accessing medical databases and legal records. Alicia, according to the hospital's donor database, Christopher Ravencrest has personally funded over $2 million in environmental illness treatment over the past 3 years. Treatment specifically for communities affected by Ravencrest Industries' historical operations. $2 million of his personal inheritance, not corporate funds or foundation money. His own wealth, used to heal the wounds his father created. That's significant evidence of good faith. It's proof, Celeste. Proof that the man I came to destroy has been doing the work I thought I was the only one willing to do. Christopher was pulling more files, organizing evidence with methodical precision. Bank statements showing personal transfers to victim families. Legal documents requesting environmental cleanup funding. Medical research grants targeting studies on chemical exposure effects. A comprehensive record of someone desperately trying to fix problems he hadn't created. Celeste, Alicia said, watching him work. I need you to file an emergency injunction. Prevent the federal asset seizure until we can present evidence of ongoing identity theft and criminal conspiracy. Alicia, you're asking me to stake my professional reputation on the innocence of a man you are assigned to investigate for federal crimes. I'm asking you to stake your reputation on the truth. She looked at Christopher, who was preparing legal briefs with the same gentle determination she'd seen him show to sick children and grieving families. And I'm asking you to trust me one more time. A long pause, then. I'll file the emergency injunction within the hour. But Alicia, you have until tomorrow morning to prove Christopher Ravencrest's innocence and identify the real perpetrators. After that, federal marshals will arrest you both regardless of any legal protections I can provide. We'll have the proof. You better. Because if you're wrong about this, if you've been manipulated or compromised, it won't just be your career that's destroyed. Mine will be too. The line went dead, leaving them alone with the weight of 18 hours to prove innocence and expose a corruption network that had been operating successfully for over 20 years. Tomorrow morning, Christopher said quietly, that's what we have. Alicia felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with impossible deadlines and life-changing stakes. 18 hours to prove your innocence and expose criminals who've been staying ahead of federal investigators for decades. Then we better get started. He moved to a wall safe she hadn't noticed before, entering a complex combination with the careful precision of someone protecting valuable secrets. I've been keeping the most sensitive evidence here. Documents I couldn't risk anyone finding during routine business operations or legal discovery processes. The safe opened to reveal stacks of files, multiple hard drives, and what looked like professional audio recording equipment. Chris, have you been conducting your own surveillance operations? For 2 years, I knew someone was using my corporate authority to continue criminal activities. But I couldn't prove it without documented evidence. He pulled out a digital recorder, its memory card full of stored conversations. I've been recording every interaction with my father's former business associates, every phone call, every meeting, every friendly visit from people who claim to be helping me understand my inherited responsibilities. That's brilliant. That's desperation. His smile was grim but determined. When you realize your entire inheritance is built on poisoned ground, you get desperate to find some solid footing, to build something better. Alicia picked up one of the hard drives, feeling its weight and significance. What's on these? Security footage from company headquarters going back 3 years. Every time Victor Crane, Helena Voss, or Senator Webb visited the building. Every document they accessed, every computer they used, every signature they forged while thinking they were unobserved. You have footage of them forging your signature. I have footage of Helena Voss using my personal computer to authorize disposal contracts while I was testifying in environmental lawsuits in London. I have audio recordings of Victor Crane discussing bribery schedules with someone he refers to as the senator. I have bank records showing financial transfers that occurred while I was giving depositions in victim compensation cases. Alicia stared at him, feeling hope and amazement in equal measure. Chris, this is enough evidence to destroy them completely. It's enough evidence to prove they've been committing crimes, but it's not enough evidence to prove I didn't know about their activities and allow them to continue. He pulled out another file, this one thick with legal documentation. That's the prosecutorial challenge. Even with proof of identity theft and forgery, federal attorneys could argue I was complicit, that I knew about the ongoing crimes and chose not to report them. But you have been fighting their operations. I've been fighting them quietly, through private investigations and civil lawsuits and settlement negotiations. Nothing that created a clear public record of opposition that would satisfy a federal prosecutor looking for easy convictions. Alicia felt understanding dawn with painful clarity. That's why you needed the contract marriage. You needed someone inside your organization who could witness the ongoing crimes and document your opposition to them. The marriage contract was my idea, Christopher admitted. I told my lawyers I needed a spouse with environmental expertise who could help oversee cleanup and compliance programs. And when I applied for the position, with my background in environmental law and obvious personal motivation, I thought you might be exactly what I needed, someone who cared enough about environmental accountability to look closely at company operations, someone who would notice if criminal activities were continuing and help me prove I wasn't responsible for them. You wanted me to find evidence of the ongoing conspiracy. I wanted you to help me prove I was fighting it, not leading it. He pulled out the thick marriage contract, the legal document she'd only skimmed 6 months ago when she was focused on gaining access to his operations. Alicia, read the contract again. Really read it this time. She took the document, scanning legal language she'd dismissed as standard boilerplate during her original mission briefing. But now, reading carefully with full attention, she saw clauses that changed everything. The contracted spouse shall have unlimited access to all corporate records for the purpose of environmental oversight and compliance verification, she read aloud. Keep reading. The contracted spouse is specifically authorized to conduct independent investigations into all company operations, past and present, and to report any findings of criminal activity to appropriate legal authorities without restriction or corporate interference. She looked up at him with growing amazement. Chris, this contract gave me legal authority to investigate you. It gave you legal protection to investigate criminal activities within my company, even if those activities were being conducted without my knowledge or consent. You were trying to create a legitimate whistleblower position. I was trying to create a partner with the legal expertise and moral conviction necessary to help me expose the truth and clean up the mess properly. His voice was gentle but serious. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by wealth or impressed by corporate authority. Someone who would fight for real solutions, regardless of personal cost or political pressure. Alicia felt her understanding of the past 6 months completely reorganize itself around this new information. When I challenged you about corporate environmental responsibility during our first meeting, I knew you were exactly what I'd been hoping for. Someone who wouldn't accept easy answers or corporate spin. Someone who would dig deeper until you found the real truth, whatever that turned out to be. And when I started gathering evidence that seemed to prove your guilt, I hoped you were gathering evidence of the criminal conspiracy I couldn't prove myself. He touched her face gently, his brown eyes steady on hers. I hoped you would find the truth and help me expose it, regardless of what that truth revealed about my family's legacy or my own potential legal jeopardy. But I was planning to use that evidence to destroy you. You were planning to seek accountability for your community and your grandmother's memory. I was hoping you'd find a way to achieve real healing without destroying someone who was trying to help solve the same problems you were fighting. Alicia's phone buzzed with another urgent text from Isaiah. FBI search teams at your apartment building. They have warrants for everything: computers, files, personal papers. Whatever you're doing, be careful. This is serious federal heat. They're moving fast, she said, showing Christopher the message. Then we need to move faster. He was already connecting hard drives to his computer, transferring files with practiced efficiency. Help me organize this evidence chronologically. We need to create a timeline that proves the ongoing criminal conspiracy while establishing my consistent opposition to those activities. They worked in focused collaboration, Christopher pulling surveillance files while Alicia organized them by date and criminal activity. Bank transfers showing systematic bribery. Forged permits authorizing illegal dumping. Audio recordings revealing conspiracy planning and victim intimidation. Security footage documenting unauthorized access to corporate systems and signature forgery. Here, Alicia said, pointing to a bank transfer dated 18 months ago. $500,000 payment to Victor Crane's offshore account, authorized with your signature. Christopher pulled out his travel calendar. I was in federal court that day, testifying in an environmental lawsuit brought by Riverside families against Ravencrest Industries' historical operations. They authorized a bribery payment while you were in court testifying on behalf of the victims of environmental crimes. The irony would be amusing if people weren't dying because of their ongoing operations. And they continued building the comprehensive timeline, each forged document matched with ironclad proof of Christopher's location elsewhere. Each criminal authorization paired with evidence of his efforts to prevent or remediate the exact activities being conducted in his name. This is overwhelming, Alicia said, looking at the organized evidence spread across his desk. Chris, this proves systematic identity theft, conspiracy, and ongoing criminal enterprise. But there's still one major problem. What? Prosecutorial jurisdiction. If we present this evidence to federal authorities, the same people who've been investigating you will control how it's interpreted and used. And they've already invested significant resources in building a case against me. They won't want to admit they've been targeting the wrong person for 6 months. More than that, Alicia realized with growing alarm, if this corruption network reaches into federal law enforcement agencies, presenting evidence to the FBI could be like handing our proof directly to the criminals. Christopher pulled out another audio recording, one they hadn't reviewed yet. This is from last week. Senator Webb talking to someone he identifies as our contact in federal law enforcement. They listened to Webb's voice with growing horror. Agent Kane is asking too many questions about signature analysis and timeline discrepancies. We need him removed from the investigation and replaced with someone more cooperative. I'll arrange for our federal liaison to handle the personnel transfer. They have someone inside the FBI, Alicia whispered, Someone with enough authority to manipulate investigations and control evidence. Someone who can ensure Christopher Ravencrest gets convicted while the real criminals escape detection. The implications hit them simultaneously. They weren't just fighting a corruption network that had been poisoning communities for decades. They were fighting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of federal law enforcement, with the power to control investigations, manipulate evidence, and eliminate anyone who got too close to the truth. Inspector Kane, Alicia realized. When he was pressing me for evidence, when he refused to consider alternative theories about the crimes, he wasn't being thorough, he was being controlled. And now that we've refused to cooperate, they'll eliminate us both as threats to their operations, along with all the evidence we've gathered. Christopher stood up, moving to the window where late morning sunlight revealed the scope of their isolation. There has to be another way. Someone in law enforcement who isn't compromised. Someone with independent authority to investigate federal crimes. Who? If they can manipulate FBI investigations, if they can control federal prosecutors, if they can eliminate inconvenient agents, who has the power to challenge them? Someone outside federal jurisdiction, Christopher said thoughtfully. Someone with state-level authority that doesn't answer to federal oversight. State environmental crimes cross federal boundaries. They'd claim federal jurisdiction and take over any state investigation. But murder doesn't. Homicide investigations remain under state authority regardless of federal connections. Christopher turned back to her, his expression grim but determined. If we can prove they've been killing environmental activists to protect their operations, state prosecutors can build cases that federal authorities can't interfere with. Alicia felt genuine hope stirring for the first time since this crisis began. You're absolutely right. Murder charges would give state attorneys general independent jurisdiction that federal agents couldn't override. And once state authorities arrest them for homicide, their federal protection becomes irrelevant. We need evidence of specific murders. Names, dates, methods, proof that connects the corruption network directly to activist deaths. Christopher pulled out a file she hadn't seen before, thick with newspaper clippings, police reports, and medical examiner findings. I've been investigating environmental activist deaths for 2 years, trying to find patterns that might help me understand who was eliminating people who got too close to the truth. The file contained documentation of 15 environmental activists who had died over the past 5 years under suspicious circumstances. Apparent accidents, sudden illnesses, mysterious disappearances, all involving people who had been investigating activities connected to companies using Ravencrest Industries' corporate authority. 15 people, Alicia said quietly, scanning the death records. 15 people who died while getting too close to exposing the ongoing criminal operations. Christopher's voice was heavy with the weight of unjust responsibility. And their deaths were blamed on accidents or natural causes, while the real killers stayed hidden behind corporate protection and federal immunity. Now we're number 16 and 17 on their elimination list. Then we better make sure we expose them before they can silence us permanently. As they continued building their case, Alicia felt the familiar sense of connection that had been growing between them for months. Working together, combining her investigative expertise with his inside knowledge, they were more effective than either could have been alone. But more than that, she felt the deeper pull of attraction and emotional partnership that had been developing despite every reason it shouldn't exist. When Christopher leaned over her shoulder to point out details in financial records, she was intensely aware of his proximity. The warmth radiating from his body, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. The way his breath stirred her hair when he spoke quietly near her ear. Here, he said, his finger tracing a pattern in bank transfers, while his other hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Look at the timing of these payments, to Victor Crane. They correlate exactly with environmental permit approvals for illegal dumping operations. She felt herself leaning back slightly into his touch, drawing comfort and strength from the contact. And these payments to Helena Voss correspond with disposal contract authorizations using your forged signature. The systematic nature of the conspiracy is clear, Christopher said, but his voice had grown rougher, as if he too was affected by their proximity. They've been operating like a well-organized criminal enterprise for years. When she turned to respond, she found herself much closer to him than she'd expected. Close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough that when he swallowed hard, she could see the movement in his throat. "Chris," she said softly, and something in her voice made his eyes darken with awareness. "We should focus on the evidence," he said, but he made no move to step away from her. "We should," she agreed, but her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. The moments stretched between them, charged with months of suppressed attraction and the relief of finally being honest with each other. She could see desire warring with responsibility in his expression, could feel the tension in his body as he fought the urge to abandon their investigation in favor of exploring the connection that had been building between them. "Alicia," he said, her name coming out rough with suppressed longing. "I know," she whispered, understanding his internal struggle because she felt it too. "We have 18 hours to save both our lives and expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government. We should be focused entirely on gathering evidence. But I spent 6 months lying to you, 6 months fighting what I felt every time you looked at me like this. 6 months denying that somewhere between our first argument and this moment, I fell completely in love with you." Her hand moved from his chest to cup his face, feeling the slight roughness of morning stubble beneath her palm. "And I'm tired of lying, Chris, about everything." When he kissed her this time, it was with the desperate urgency of people who understood they might not have another chance. All the careful boundaries they'd maintained, all the professional distance of their contract marriage, all the walls she'd built around her heart, everything dissolved in the heat of finally acknowledging what had been growing between them for months. She felt herself being lifted, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her from the study to their bedroom, the space that had been neutral territory throughout their marriage, where they'd slept beside each other with careful distance and professional boundaries. But now, as Christopher set her down gently beside their bed, the room felt transformed. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands framing her face with reverent gentleness. "With everything we're facing, with the danger we're in?" "I'm sure." She began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite the magnitude of what they were choosing. "For 6 months, I've been living a lie. I want one completely honest moment before we risk everything to expose the truth." He helped her with the buttons, their hands brushing as they worked together to eliminate the barriers between them. When his shirt fell away, she placed her palms flat against his chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of his heartbeat, the warmth of skin that spoke to very human vulnerability beneath his corporate authority. "Beautiful," she whispered, not just about his physical form, but about everything he represented, the transformation of inherited guilt into purposeful action, the courage to seek truth regardless of personal cost. His hands moved to the silk belt of her robe, pausing to give her one more chance to reconsider. When she nodded, he untied it with careful reverence, the fabric falling away to reveal the nightgown beneath. Something she'd chosen weeks ago because it made her feel beautiful. Because somewhere in her heart, she'd been hoping for exactly this moment. "Alicia," he breathed, his eyes taking in not just her physical form, but the trust she was showing him. "You're extraordinary." When he kissed her again, she felt herself dissolving into sensation and emotion. His lips traced a path from her mouth to her throat, and she gasped at the electricity that sparked wherever he touched. 6 months of suppressed attraction poured out between them as they explored this new territory with reverent care. The nightgown slipped away like morning mist, and she felt no self-consciousness, only the overwhelming rightness of being seen completely by someone who understood both her strength and her vulnerability. When his lips found the pulse point at her throat, she made a sound she didn't recognize, her hands tangling in his hair as waves of sensation washed through her. "Is this what you want?" he asked against her skin, his voice rough with desire and careful control. "Yes," she managed, though the word came out more breath than sound. "Christopher." "Yes." He lifted her with gentle strength, laying her down on silk sheets that felt cool against heated skin, a morning light painted patterns across their bodies as they explored each other with growing confidence. Every touch was a revelation, every kiss a promise of partnership that went far beyond their environmental mission. She discovered the scar on his shoulder from a childhood accident, and he traced the birthmark on her hip with tender fascination. Each revealed detail felt like a secret shared, a layer of intimacy that went deeper than physical attraction. "I've imagined this," he confessed, his hands mapping the curves of her body with worshipful attention. During our heated arguments about corporate responsibility, during quiet conversations over morning coffee, during board meetings when I should have been focused on business. "And?" she asked, arching into his touch as his hands found places that made her gasp with pleasure. "The reality is infinitely better than imagination," he replied, lowering his head to press gentle kisses along her collarbone. "Because this isn't just physical attraction, Alicia. This is connection between souls who recognize each other." When their bodies finally joined completely, it felt like coming home and discovering new territories simultaneously. She felt herself surrendering, not just physically, but emotionally, all the walls she'd built around her heart crumbling as they moved together in ancient rhythm. "I love you," she whispered against his lips as passion built between them like gathering storm clouds. "Not despite everything that brought us together, but because of it. Because you're the man who transforms poison into healing." "I love you," he replied, his voice breaking slightly with the intensity of emotion and sensation. "The woman who came to destroy me and ended up saving me instead, who chose truth over revenge." Their lovemaking was tender and desperate simultaneously. Months of suppressed longing pouring out in kisses and caresses that spoke of hearts finally free to express their deepest feelings. She felt herself climbing toward something that was more than physical release, a connection that reached into her soul and rewrote everything she thought she knew about love and trust. When completion finally claimed them both, it was with the force of revelation. Not just physical satisfaction, though that was overwhelming, but the recognition that they'd found something rare and precious. Love that emerged from deception and grew stronger through crisis. They lay entwined in the aftermath, skin cooling in the morning air, hearts gradually slowing from their frantic rhythm. She felt fundamentally changed, not just by the physical intimacy, but by the emotional surrender it represented. Sometimes the most powerful connections emerge from the most impossible circumstances. Have you ever discovered that the person you thought you couldn't trust was actually the one person who understood your heart completely? "No regrets?" Christopher asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Only one," she said, settling more comfortably against his side, feeling utterly content for the first time in years. "What's that?" "That it took us 6 months to be honest about this." She looked up at him, seeing satisfaction and tenderness in his expression. "That we wasted so much time fighting what we both wanted." "Not wasted," he corrected gently, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Building toward this, learning to trust each other despite impossible circumstances, proving that what we feel is strong enough to survive anything." The phone began ringing again, a harsh intrusion into their moment of perfect intimacy, but instead of the panic she might have felt an hour ago, Alicia felt only calm determination. "Ready to face the world together?" she asked, making no move to answer the call immediately. "With you, I'm ready for anything." Christopher's arms tightened around her protectively. "Whatever comes next, federal investigations, criminal conspiracies, public scrutiny, we handle it as partners. Real partners. In every sense that matters." "Partners," she agreed, feeling the weight and promise of the word settle into her bones like an oath. When she finally reached for the phone, it was with the confidence of someone who'd found her true place in the world. But the caller ID didn't show Inspector Kane's name. Instead, it displayed a number she didn't recognize, with a message that made her blood run cold. "We know what you've discovered. Stop now or face the consequences." Christopher saw her expression change and sat up immediately, all post-lovemaking contentment replaced by sharp alertness. "What is it?" She showed him the message, and his jaw tightened with grim determination. "They know we're onto them," he said. "The real criminals behind the forged signatures and ongoing environmental crimes. They know we figured out the truth. Which means they'll try to eliminate us before we can expose them. Then we better move fast. Christopher was already reaching for his clothes, the tender lover replaced by the focused businessman who'd been fighting this battle for 3 years. We need to get this evidence to people they can't intimidate or silence. As they dressed quickly, the weight of their situation settled around them like armor. They'd found love in the most impossible circumstances, but now they had to fight for the chance to keep it. The phone buzzed with another message. You have 24 hours to forget everything you think you know. After that, accidents happen. Alicia looked at Christopher, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. They'd chosen each other, chosen love over revenge, partnership over punishment. Now they had to prove that choice was strong enough to survive against people who would kill to protect their secrets. Together, she asked, the same question that had started their partnership in honesty. Together, he confirmed, and this time the word carried the weight of everything they'd shared. Not just physical intimacy, but the promise to stand beside each other regardless of the cost. Within an hour, they were back in Christopher's study, but everything felt different now. The air between them hummed with newfound intimacy, and even as they focused on life-or-death investigation, Alicia found herself hyper-aware of his every movement. The way his hand brushed against hers when they reached for the same document, the way he unconsciously moved closer when explaining complex financial records. The way his eyes tracked her movements with the heated awareness of someone who'd finally claimed what he'd wanted for months. Look at this pattern, Christopher said, leaning over her shoulder to point at bank records spread across his desk. His breath was warm against her ear, and she felt that familiar flutter of desire, even as they discussed systematic bribery and corruption. The payments to Victor Crane correlate exactly with environmental permit approvals, she replied, trying to focus on the evidence despite the way his proximity affected her concentration. When he moved even closer, ostensibly to examine the documents, she could feel the heat radiating from his body through his shirt. And these transfers to Helena Voss happen within 24 hours of disposal contract authorizations using my forged signature, he said, his voice slightly rougher than necessary. His hand came to rest on the desk beside hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. She turned to respond and found herself trapped between his body and the desk, close enough to see the way his pupils dilated when he looked at her. Chris, she said softly, and something in her voice made his jaw tighten with visible restraint. We should focus, he said, but his eyes were fixed on her lips. We should, she agreed, but her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. The moments stretched between them, charged with the memory of their lovemaking and the constant awareness that they might not survive the next 24 hours. She could see desire warring with responsibility in his expression, could feel the tension in his body as he fought the urge to abandon their investigation in favor of claiming her again. Alicia, he said, her name coming out rough with barely suppressed longing. Before she could respond, her phone rang with a call that shattered the intimate moment. The caller ID showed Celeste Hartwell's name, and she knew immediately that something significant had happened. Celeste? Alicia, there's been a major development. Helena Voss was arrested in Vermont this morning for environmental terrorism. She's providing comprehensive testimony about the corruption network in exchange for federal protection. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. Christopher steadied her with gentle hands, reading her expression for signs of hope or continued danger. She's cooperating completely? Alicia asked. Everything. The bribery network, the identity theft, the systematic murder of environmental activists. She's given federal prosecutors detailed evidence about Victor Crane, Senator Webb, and their entire operation. Celeste's voice carried professional satisfaction. Most importantly, she's confirmed that Christopher Ravencrest has been a victim of systematic identity theft rather than a perpetrator of environmental crimes. Does this mean the federal charges against Christopher are being dropped? The federal investigation has been completely redirected. Instead of targeting Christopher, they're now building cases against the actual criminals. Asset seizure warrants have been canceled, and Christopher's name is being officially cleared. Alicia felt tears of relief threatening as she looked at Christopher, seeing hope dawn in his expression for the first time since this crisis began. There's more, Celeste continued. Helena Voss provided specific intelligence about plans to eliminate you and Christopher within the next few hours. Federal marshals are being deployed for your protection immediately. They were really planning to kill us? Car accident staged for tonight, designed to look like you lost control while fleeing federal investigation. Celeste's voice turned sharp with professional outrage. These people have been eliminating threats for 20 years. They weren't going to let you live to testify. As Celeste spoke, Alicia felt Christopher's hand move to her neck, his thumb finding her pulse point in a gesture that was both romantic and protective. Even in relief, even with federal protection being offered, his body language spoke of someone prepared to defend what mattered most to him. Agent Bowie, we need you and Christopher to come in for official debriefing and protection detail coordination. We'll be there within the hour. Good. And Agent Bowie, you made the right choice. If you'd followed your original orders and arrested Christopher this morning, the real criminals would have escaped while an innocent man went to prison. After hanging up, she looked at Christopher, seeing her own mixture of relief and residual disbelief reflected in his expression. We won? She asked, hardly daring to believe it. We survived the first phase, he corrected, pulling her closer across the small space between them. Now comes the harder work of ensuring real accountability is served, that all the victims get appropriate compensation, that the environmental cleanup actually happens. Together? Together, he confirmed, and when he kissed her gently, she tasted victory and promise in equal measure. Have you ever fought for something so important that you were willing to risk everything, including your life? Have you ever discovered that the person standing beside you in that fight was worth more than the victory itself? Later that evening, after hours of federal debriefing and protection detail coordination, they finally returned to Christopher's penthouse. The space felt different now, not a place of deception and careful boundaries, but truly home. I can't quite believe it's over, Alicia said, settling beside him on the sofa, where they'd shared their first honest conversation that morning. The immediate crisis is over, Christopher agreed, his arm coming around her with natural ease. Victor Crane and Senator Webb are in federal custody. The Environmental Crimes Network has been exposed and dismantled. And the victims' families will finally get real accountability and appropriate compensation, including your grandmother's memory being properly honored. He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she felt the same flutter of awareness that had become as natural as breathing, including your community getting the cleanup and medical assistance they've needed for years. She thought about Dolores Bowie, about Sophia Martinez, about all the families who'd suffered while corrupt officials protected environmental criminals. Their deaths hadn't been in vain. They'd led to this moment of healing and responsibility. What happens now? She asked, settling more comfortably against his side. Now we build something better from the pieces of what was broken. Christopher's voice carried quiet determination. The Ravencrest Foundation for Environmental Accountability, funded by restored company profits, staffed by people who understand that real change requires partnership between victims and allies. You still want me as your partner, even though the FBI assignment is over, even though the crisis that brought us together is resolved? Alicia, I don't want you as my partner despite our complicated beginning. I want you because of it. He turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with the same reverence he'd shown during their morning lovemaking. Because you came here seeking accountability and stayed to help build healing. Because you chose truth over revenge, love over hatred. And because somewhere in fighting this battle together, we found something worth fighting for. Exactly. When he kissed her this time, it carried all the promise of their shared future. Not just romantic partnership, but professional collaboration in service of causes larger than themselves. Their kiss deepened, months of tension and newly acknowledged love pouring out between them. She felt herself melting into him again, desire building as naturally as breathing, despite everything they'd been through that day. Chris, she whispered against his lips, her hands fisting in his shirt as familiar heat spread through her system. I know, he replied, understanding her need, because he felt it too. We should probably get some rest. It's been an exhausting day. We should, she agreed, but she made no move to step away from his embrace. Instead, she found herself tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips, marveling at the fact that she could touch him freely now, without deception or hidden agendas. "But," he asked, his voice rough with growing desire, "but I spent 6 months sleeping beside you while maintaining careful distance. I spent 6 months fighting what I felt every time you looked at me." She looked into his eyes, seeing her own desire reflected there. "I don't want careful distance anymore, Chris. I want to fall asleep in your arms and wake up the same way." When he carried her to their bedroom this time, it was different from their desperate morning lovemaking. Slower, more reverent, infused with the knowledge that they had time now, time to explore, time to savor, time to build something lasting. "I love you," he whispered against her skin as he undressed her with worshipful care. "My partner in healing, my companion in building something better, my choice every day for whatever challenges we face." "I love you too," she replied, helping him out of his clothes with hands that trembled slightly with anticipation. "My husband, not by contract, but by conviction, my ally in environmental protection." Their second joining was everything their first had been, and more. Physical passion layered with emotional connection, desire strengthened by trust, love deepened by shared purpose. She felt herself surrendering completely, knowing that she was safe in his arms, that they'd chosen each other not just for the moment, but for whatever future they would build together. When they lay entwined afterward, skin cooling in the evening air, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death. Not just the satisfaction of physical fulfillment, though that was profound, but the deeper contentment of finding her true place in the world. "Any regrets?" Christopher asked softly, his fingers combing through her hair with gentle reverence. "Only one," she said, pressing a kiss to his chest where she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her lips. "What's that?" "That my grandmother didn't live to see this, to see me choose love over hatred, building over destroying." She looked up at him, seeing the same peace in his expression that she felt in her heart. "She would have liked you, Chris. She would have appreciated what you've been trying to do for communities like ours. She would have been proud of what you've accomplished. Not just exposing the corruption network, but transforming your pain into purpose that helps other families. We accomplished it," she corrected, "together." As they held each other in the quiet of evening, Alicia reflected on the journey that had brought her from FBI infiltration to genuine love. She'd come seeking revenge and found redemption instead. She'd planned destruction and discovered healing. Most importantly, she'd learned the difference between fighting against something and fighting for something. The phone rang one final time, and Christopher answered without letting go of her. "Christopher, it's your mother. I've been coordinating with state attorneys general and environmental advocacy groups across 7 states. We're ready to announce the comprehensive environmental healing initiative tomorrow. Thank you, Mother, for everything." "Thank Alicia, dear. She's the one who helped you find the courage to seek truth instead of settling for legal settlements." Cordelia's voice carried warmth and approval. "And Christopher?" "Yes? When you're ready to make your partnership official, the church is available any weekend you choose." Christopher looked at Alicia, who nodded with a smile that promised forever. "We'll let you know soon, Mother." As the city lights sparkled beyond their windows, Alicia thought about the choice she'd made that morning. Finger hovering over a send button that would have destroyed everything. Instead of pressing it, she'd chosen investigation over destruction, partnership over punishment, love over revenge. And in making that choice, she'd found something infinitely more powerful than satisfaction. She'd found purpose that could last a lifetime, partnership that made both of them stronger, and love that transformed everything it touched. 6 months later, Alicia stood in the Riverside General Hospital Children's Cancer Ward, watching Christopher read to the same young patients he'd been visiting for years. But now she was beside him, not as an undercover agent or contract wife, but as his genuine partner in every sense. His wife, his collaborator in environmental accountability, his companion in transforming inherited wealth into healing. And then the brave princess realized Christopher was saying to 8-year-old Marcus whose leukemia was finally in remission thanks to treatments funded by their expanded medical assistance program, that sometimes the dragon isn't the real monster in the story. "What's the real monster?" Marcus asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. "The people who pretend to be heroes while doing terrible things in secret," Alicia said, settling carefully beside him on the hospital bed. The simple movement brought her close enough to Christopher that their shoulders brushed, and even after months of marriage, she still felt that familiar spark of awareness at his proximity. "But the good news," Christopher continued, his free hand finding hers with unconscious ease, "is that when brave people work together, when they choose to help each other instead of fighting each other, they can defeat even the most hidden monsters. Like you and Mrs. Alicia did?" "Exactly like that," Alicia confirmed, feeling the warmth of Christopher's thumb tracing gentle circles on her wrist, a gesture that had become his habit during public appearances, a quiet reminder of their private connection. "We thought we were enemies, but it turned out we wanted the same thing." Dr. Elena Martinez appeared in the doorway, her smile warm with genuine affection and professional satisfaction. The threats against her had ended when Victor Crane and Senator Webb were arrested, but the friendship forged through crisis had deepened into lasting collaboration. "Mrs. Ravencrest, the latest treatment results from our environmental illness protocols are remarkable. The new research funding has improved survival rates by 30% across all age groups." "That's our combined vision," Alicia said, automatically deflecting credit with the ease of someone who'd learned that real change required partnership rather than individual recognition. "I just help identify which communities need immediate support." "It's both of you," Dr. Martinez corrected gently. "The combination of financial resources and investigative expertise has revolutionized how we approach environmental health cases." As they left the hospital, walking through corridors that no longer carried the overwhelming scent of industrial disinfectant that had haunted Alicia's memories, she reflected on how completely her understanding of healing had transformed. "Penny for your thoughts?" Christopher asked as they drove toward their next appointment, his hand finding hers with the natural intimacy of people who'd chosen each other through crisis and discovered deeper love in peaceful moments. "Just thinking about how different this is from what I originally planned." "Better or worse than your revenge fantasy?" "Different, infinitely better." She squeezed his hand, still amazed by the simple pleasure of touching him without deception or hidden agendas. "When I first came to destroy you, I thought healing meant punishment. I thought accountability meant making someone pay for harm that had been done. And now? Now I understand that real healing means fixing what's broken, not just punishing who broke it." She looked out at neighborhoods where children could play outside safely, where grandmothers could garden without fear of contaminated soil. "It means transforming pain into purpose instead of passing it along to someone else." They pulled up to the Riverside Community Center, where they were scheduled to meet with families affected by the original pollution. What had once been a source of anger and resentment had become genuine partnership. Community leaders working with the foundation to direct cleanup efforts and ensure meaningful input into how accountability was achieved. Isaiah was waiting outside, his expression warm with the complicated affection of siblings who'd weathered fundamental disagreement and found their way back to love. "Alicia," he said, embracing her with careful love. "Christopher, how are the new water filtration systems performing?" Christopher asked, his greeting respectful and warm. "Better than anyone hoped. Contamination levels have dropped by 85%. Isaiah's tone carried gratitude that had gradually warmed into partnership. "The children can play in community gardens again without parents worrying about soil contamination." "And the air quality monitoring?" 3 months without a single child needing emergency inhaler assistance. Wonder colored Isaiah's voice. "Dr. Martinez says it's the most dramatic environmental health improvement she's seen in 20 years. They entered the community center, where 43 families had gathered, people whose lives had been devastated by decades of corporate pollution, now working collaboratively to rebuild their community and prevent similar harm elsewhere. Mrs. Santos approached them with hands extended in greeting, her weathered face bright with hope that had replaced years of resigned suffering. "Mrs. Ravencrest, Miguel started reading at grade level last month, His concentration has improved dramatically since environmental toxins were removed. And Elena? Alicia asked about Mrs. Santos's granddaughter. Accepted to pre-med at State University, full scholarship for undergraduate and medical school. Tears gathered in the older woman's eyes. She wants to become a pediatric oncologist like Dr. Martinez, wants to help children who get sick from pollution. Christopher had been quietly listening, and Alicia saw the familiar expression of determined purpose cross his features, the same look he'd worn when she first challenged him about corporate responsibility. Mrs. Santos, he said thoughtfully, what if we expanded the scholarship program beyond medical school? Environmental law, investigative journalism, community organizing, whatever education your community's young people need to become advocates. You would do that? We would do that, Alicia corrected, including herself in the commitment with natural ease. Your community deserves leaders who understand environmental challenges from personal experience. The meeting continued for 2 hours, families sharing updates on health improvements, educational progress, and ongoing concerns about environmental safety. Instead of anger and helplessness that had characterized these gatherings for years, there was productive collaboration and genuine hope. The most important thing, said Maria Gonzalez, whose daughter had been in Sofia Martinez's reading program, is that our children are learning they don't have to accept what seems unchangeable. They're seeing that persistent effort and adequate resources can solve even the biggest problems. And they're seeing that healing is possible, added James Washington, whose family had been among the first to receive compensation. Not just medical healing, but community healing, learning to trust again after years of being told nothing could be done. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Santos approached them one final time. Mrs. Ravencrest, when we first heard you had married Christopher, many people were angry. We thought you had betrayed your grandmother's memory for money and status. Alicia felt her throat tighten with familiar emotion. I understand why you felt that way. But watching you these past months, seeing how you fight for families you don't even know, seeing how you've turned pain into purpose. Mrs. Santos touched Alicia's cheek gently. Your grandmother would be proud, not because you got revenge, but because you found a way to prevent harm from continuing. She would be proud because you chose healing over hatred, Isaiah added, joining the conversation with genuine admiration. Because you learned the difference between destroying enemies and solving problems they created. As they drove home through neighborhoods where children played outside without protective masks, where families could open windows without fear of industrial contamination, Alicia reflected on the journey from FBI infiltration to genuine partnership. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd pressed that send button? She asked as they pulled into their driveway, not the isolated penthouse, but a comfortable home where they could be part of a community. If you'd triggered my arrest and set me to prison for crimes I didn't commit. If I'd chosen destruction over investigation, revenge over understanding. Christopher considered the question seriously. I think you would have gotten temporary satisfaction from seeing someone punished, but the real criminals would have escaped, and problems that killed your grandmother would have continued. And thousands of other families would have suffered while the corruption network adapted and expanded. Instead, we found a way to expose actual criminals and solve underlying problems. His voice carried no bitterness, only thoughtful analysis. We chose to build something better instead of just tearing something down. That evening, as they reviewed case files for their next investigation, a chemical company in Oregon bribing state officials while dumping toxins into groundwater, Alicia's phone rang with a call that made her smile. Mrs. Ravencrest, this is Celeste Hartwell. I wanted to update you on the Oregon case we discussed. Good news, I hope? The best possible outcome. The state attorney general has filed comprehensive charges against the company executives and government officials involved. But more importantly, affected families are receiving immediate medical assistance, and environmental cleanup is beginning immediately. No lengthy legal battles while people continue suffering. None. Your foundation's model of combining victim advocacy with corporate responsibility is being replicated across multiple states. Celeste's voice carried professional satisfaction. You've created a template for environmental healing that actually works. After hanging up, Christopher pulled her close on their living room sofa. Comfortable furniture chosen for daily use, rather than impressive display. More communities healing, he said. More families getting accountability instead of legal settlements. More opportunities to choose collaboration over confrontation. Any regrets about giving up your FBI career for this work? Only one, she said, settling against his shoulder with complete contentment. What's that? That it took me so long to understand the difference between fighting against something and fighting for something. She looked up at him, seeing the man who taught her that lesson through his example of transforming inherited guilt into purposeful action. Fighting against you would have destroyed an innocent person and left real problems unsolved. Fighting for environmental healing brought us together and created meaningful change. So what are we fighting for now? Clean air and water for children who deserve to play safely. Medical treatment for families who can't afford specialized care. Responsibility for people who think wealth makes them immune to consequences. She smiled. Feeling familiar purpose focused on construction rather than destruction. Love that transforms inherited pain into inherited healing. I love you, Alicia Bowie Ravencrest, my partner in healing, my companion in building better futures, my choice every day for whatever challenges we face. I love you too, Christopher Ravencrest, my husband not by contract but by conviction, my ally in environmental protection, my reminder that even the deepest wounds can become wisdom and strength. Outside their window, city lights sparkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in those lights, families were sleeping peacefully because corrupt officials were in prison, because environmental crimes were being prosecuted seriously, because two people had chosen love over revenge. Children were breathing clean air because cleanup programs were adequately funded. Grandmothers were tending gardens in purified soil. Young people were preparing for medical school and law school and environmental science programs, ready to continue the fight with resources their predecessors never imagined possible. You know, it makes you think. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's discovering they were never your real enemies at all. Sometimes healing isn't about punishment, but about prevention. And sometimes, when we let go of revenge, we find something infinitely more powerful. Love that transforms everything it touches. Christopher and Alicia had learned that lesson through deception and federal investigation and near destruction of everything they cared about. But in learning it, they'd found not just each other, but sustainable environmental healing that honored every victim while preventing future harm. Their story had begun with a finger hovering over a send button, choosing between destruction and investigation. It had evolved through crisis and revelation and gradual understanding that real enemies were hidden, while apparent enemies were actually allies. And it had culminated in recognition that love, not hatred, had power to create lasting change. In a children's cancer ward where Sofia Martinez had once fought for her life, young patients now received treatment funded by people who understood that healing required resources, commitment, and transformation of guilt into purposeful action, not through revenge, but through love that grows when people choose each other instead of fighting each other. That's the power of choosing love over vengeance. That's the victory of partnership over punishment. And that's why sometimes the best way to honor the dead isn't to destroy the living, but to transform them into allies in healing the world they'll leave to future generations. What would you choose? When perfect revenge is right there in your hands, when evidence to destroy someone is at your fingertips, would you have courage to investigate deeper, to consider that your real enemy might be hiding behind the obvious target, to choose love and partnership over hatred and destruction? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between revenge and healing? Between destroying someone who hurt you and working with them to solve underlying problems? How did you find strength to choose the harder path of building instead of breaking? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love that transforms even the deepest wounds into wisdom, about partnerships that emerge from unlikely circumstances, about the power of choosing healing over hatred. Tomorrow we'll share another tale of hearts that dare to hope beyond pain. Another story of love conquering, not through destruction, but but through patient work of building something better. Until then, remember, the greatest victories come not from eliminating enemies, but from transforming them into people who help heal the world. Real healing isn't about punishment, it's about prevention. And love, when chosen over revenge, has power to create changes that last for generations.